Ellie, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Tim?
Good. It's good to have you back.
Yeah, it's great to be on.
Absolutely. We spoke just over 3 weeks ago. I think you reached out because you wanted to talk a bit about the thing you're working on today. So you've come on to talk about Ridge data. Is that right?
That's right, Ridge AI.
Ridge AI. Fine. Ridge AI. Okay. So before we get into that, obviously, for many people watching, they might know who you are, but I also assume a large part of my audience probably started learning Tableau well after you'd moved on from Tableau. So why don't you give a bit of a history of who you are, what you're doing now, and yeah, a bit of your heritage?
Yeah, sure. I was at Tableau starting in '08 when it was under 100 people, and I was hired to do a split product management, product marketing job, and ended up doing that and launching Tableau Public, which is still kind of one of the highlights of my career.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm most proud of is I got the nickname Godmother of Tableau Public, which I just think is awesome, and I'll hold on
That
to
might
that.
be the thumbnail. Be careful.
Yeah, it was back in the days where we couldn't get any press coverage for Tableau. We had this core group of really excited customers who could see what we were doing, and we believed in it, but press wasn't covering us. For Tableau Public, the first few publishes, the first 6 months or so, we're calling up friends and family. Do you have a blog? Do you want to publish something?
Yeah.
So it really took off from there, and was a great community and a great product. And I stayed for over a decade,
Yeah.
which is not what I had expected to do, but really loved what we were doing there, and believed and still believe that data can transform conversations,
Right.
organizations, and so on.
Right.
One of the things we did there, just leading into Ridge a bit, is we would sell embedded analytics, which are
Right.
really
Yeah.
analytics that you put on the web for usually for other people to consume.
Hmm.
And I think we had a really good offering at the time for the technology available, but it was still a little bit slow, and it took the way we had to price it was pretty inflexible and high.
Hmm.
Anyway, I left Tableau after the Salesforce acquisition, about a year and a half after, and I went to a company called SalesLoft.
Yeah.
And I went there because they had this nascent sales workflow, so action
Hmm.
flow. And I'm a huge believer that data and action, peanut butter and jelly, they go together.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring data into that workflow because a lot of people will say, "Hey, sellers aren't analysts; they're not data people," and that's true. You don't want them kicking around in Tableau or somewhere else.
Yeah.
They have other selling things to do. But if you give them data in the right moment, it can really help them take action. And I believe that about almost anything out there. If you position the data right, you make it relevant, you make it strong, it can really help us have better conversations, take better action, and so on.
Right.
So I stayed there almost 4 years, and we built out a platform that really expanded on the sales workflow and did put action and data in this tight loop.
Okay.
Um, when I ended up leaving there, um, I was going to take some time off because it had been about between those two stints, almost 16 years, and about a week in between, two children along the way. And I figured I could use some time to just rest for a bit. So it
Yeah.
was nice to have a holiday season with no meetings and no acquisitions or anything else going on. Um, but right around the time I left, I started talking to my co-founder, Jeff Heer,
Hmm.
who is sort of legendary in the visualization space. He's over at UW. He leads the visualization center over there. He's been part of
Okay.
projects like Vega and D3 and most recently Mosaic open source. And we were ruminating just on kind of the state of data on the web.
Hmm.
Some of his recent work had made data on the web much faster, which was always a big problem with putting data on
Yeah.
the web. Obviously, the web's the universal communication mechanism. That's where everything is. But data on the web is still in a really poor state, and it's always bugged
Yeah.
me. When I was at SalesLoft, we actually had to put data out for our customers, and we looked at all the tools. I had someone on my team kind of do an evaluation so
Hmm.
that we can just bring in Tableau because I'd been there. And he came back and, well, one of our best engineering managers, and he said, for the price for what we're going to get is just not worth it with any of the leading tools out there.
Wow.
And so we did not buy one. We did end up putting in a data lake with Databricks, uh,
Hmm.
and we ended up building in house. And
Okay.
we got
That's
some
really interesting.
dashboards out for our own customers, but it was slow and painful, and it was really existential for us.
Hmm.
Sometimes people think of, oh, well, there's some reporting, whatever, in that platform. Who cares? But if you're building value for your customers, you need to show them the personal value you're building for them. They
Yeah.
need to see where the opportunities and gaps are in whatever you're offering for them, whatever job you're
Hmm.
trying to do for them as a software or as a product. They need to be able to see that value, see what they're getting from it, and that's the purpose typically of dashboards and reports in a product.
Yeah.
So it was existential for us at SalesLoft as we were expanding what we were doing to do this
Hmm.
well. And I was really frustrated by how long it took and how much time. And so when Jeff and I started talking about this, I had a moment where I was almost like, I really was hoping to take 6 months to a year off and,
Yeah.
read a ton of books. And,
Have
but
a
I knew
break.
as soon as we started talking about it, I was like, I'm going to get excited about this. And,
Yeah.
we just have both felt this need to go out and make it better, make data on the web
Yeah.
better. So that's what we're doing with
Amazing.
So that's what we're doing with
Amazing. Amazing. What an arc, what a story. And I think, for so many people listening, so much of it is like aligns with their experience, right? I think embedding in Tableau has always been a little bit of a thing that's possible, but it's just like a little bit too painful. We've gone into this world where people have started building their own solutions more in-house, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, was Streamlit was a little bit of that sort of energy
Yeah.
inside of the data warehouse space, right? And then more recently, um, I don't know if it's because of AI. We'll get into this later, but I feel like the the general community has discovered what software development is, right? So everyone's vibe coding their own analytic solutions and trying to stand up these things, put the vendors aside, let's see where we can build ourselves. And so it's probably had, a resurgence for the wrong reasons, because I should say to people, no, you don't want to build your own solution. Like it's a lot of work.
There's a lot of work.
and
There's a
and this is
lot.
what I actually wanted to talk to you, because I think that balance is required, like making things safe and secure. We'll get into this, I'm sure, is a big challenge. And so I'm pretty excited about Ridge AI, because I think it is a need that is still unmet. It's still way too hard to go from a data source to being able to share something to the world. But even just the embedding playbook itself it just feels over engineered and still really hard to do in a world where you can take social media embeds and just put them anywhere you want, but yet with data it's still quite a hard thing. So I'm really happy to be talking about the product, and yeah, I'm keen to see what you're going to show us today.
That's great. Well, should we jump into it?
Absolutely, let's do it. I'll give you
Yeah.
the floor.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I'm excited to show you Ridge. And there are three big problems we've been trying to solve with Ridge, and one of them was performance.
Right.
Embedded analytics on the web, I believe, have been artificially just depressed because performance is so poor. And I've seen people trying to optimize, down to 10 seconds or 5 seconds or something that even then is just too much for users to deal with.
Right.
And so we've made everything very, very interactive. We've used Mosaic and DuckDB and WebAssembly to get
Wow.
this performance, which is amazing.
It's really
And
crisp.
yeah, uh, it's all the computation is all happening in the browser, so you don't even have to worry about hallucinations on computation because it's happening right here. And if you're
Right.
hitting something like a snowflake, you're also not paying for all that
The
crazy.
extra. Yeah.
It's happening right here. And one of the other big problems has been that dashboards, while they're wonderful and we love them and they present a story, and it's visual, they don't always let you ask questions. And so you might see asked a question right here in the data agent. And all of this data that we're looking at is usage data, adoption data of some product. And so I'm asking about different resource types that were used. That is actually not in the dashboard, but the dashboard and the data agent here are backed by the
Right.
same set of data.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah, and they can have many fields. So they can have 50 fields uh, or more, and you can put those in the ridge, and then that's available to the end user as this kind of long tail. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, and that I think was something that dashboards just suffered from because if people didn't get what they wanted, they'd ask for another dashboard, and then you had many, many dashboards.
True. Yeah.
So what I've just done is I've actually linked the dashboard and the data agent.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
That
that's
is so
cool.
cool.
Yeah,
Wow. So your conversation and your dashboard are like connected, even though the fields aren't in the dashboard. The sort of the universal context, you can kind of bring it in. It looks like a dashboard now with a chat agent. Like now that you've linked them,
it does.
they feel like they're one thing.
Right, and you can go and ask, 10 or 20 questions and then use the filters and other natural affordances in a dashboard because that's one of the advantages of a dashboard is
Mhm.
not just the ability to select and touch the data, excuse me, but also the ability to use those filters, and you don't always want to type every filter out,
Yeah.
tell me action type by this, that, or the other.
Yeah.
And so we think there's a lot of room for innovation on the form factor. Dashboards have been the stalwart for decades, and that's amazing. And they do some things really, really, really well, but they don't answer those long tails. And so we're excited about with this performance and with AI, browser-based technology, all the things that are happening right now, the ability to innovate on this form factor.
Hmm.
So this is what you get with a ridge, and I'll show you in a minute how we created this dashboard on the left. But just to let you know, these are designed to be embedded.
Yeah.
One of the other things I believe very deeply is that data should be where people are working, and so we've designed these ridges to sit in your
Nice.
product, in your web page, whatever you might have. And this is some electric vehicle data on a made up website about where you might want to put some chargers. Um, but you can see we've still got that interactive performance here, and of course you've got other questions that you can ask and get those answers right here in the data
Yeah.
agent.
That's super awesome. And the embedding story has been around for a really long while, but I think that the way you started this demo by talking about performance, that's actually been the problem, because you go into a web app, but it doesn't behave like a web app because the performance feels more like something you interact with
Right.
in Excel, right? So much,
Yeah,
much faster.
100%. We're so used to sub-second performance, and then we go to a data asset, and it's 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and it's just too long.
Exactly.
One thing that we're trying to do, and this is really important to us, is build in best practice. So you can see
Hmm.
even when I ask questions of the data agent, it's giving me a good form factor over here for the data. It's giving me the right view for the data question that I've asked. We are using SQL here in the questions to generate the questions and generate. Sorry, we're using AI to generate the SQL and generate the questions, but then we do multiple rounds of validation over here. We've created a harness, if you want to use that term, to validate the SQL, to use some deterministic methods when we know the best practice
Hmm.
to create the chart, and to validate everything along the way so that you get a very low error rate with this AI over here. And the computation is still, of course, done locally in the browser.
Amazing.
Right. So let me show you how we build these things.
Yeah. How does it work?
Yeah. So the last big problem I think that data visualization and data on the web in general has had is that it's just too hard to create. And if you think about people who use Tableau, they need to know Tableau or whatever other front end environment they're using. They need to know about their data. They need to know best practice. They need to understand the domain and the questions they're asking. And we think that you shouldn't have to take that much training before you go and create something.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and create a ridge, and I'll go ahead and select that same usage data we were looking at before. This is just data about some kind of product usage.
Yeah.
And yep, we know in the cycle of visual analysis that as people are working with data, they have to see that data. And so we've given you this preview just as performant as what we saw before, and I can inspect it, make sure it's the right data, and then go ahead and create that new dashboard. And what we're doing here is we've actually added on the left what I call a build agent.
Okay.
Mhm. It's on the right, we had the data agent. That was questions about your data. This one's gonna help us build. We all know what context does these days. I'm gonna go ahead and say, let's build. And what I'm interested in is actually adoption by department. That's what I'm trying to understand. Maybe we sell this product by department. I need to make sure all departments are adopting.
Right.
My champions are asking me that. Where can I go and talk to people about adoption? And so I'm giving it my highest level goal, the adoption goal. And so the build agent's gonna come back to me and say, "Well, what does that mean to you if you're gonna look at adoption?" Well, I care about recorded actions and distinct users. I actually don't really care about success failure right here, but I do care about
Oh.
action duration and actions per user. Maybe those are things I care about. I could actually change any of these because,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
The suggested query. That's
yeah,
quite
thank
intuitive. Yeah.
We're we're trying to solve the blank screen problem,
Yeah.
and we've inspected your data. We know this is about usage. You're getting different questions than you would get if it was marketing data or manufacturing data. But we also know the data is distinct enough and people's purposes are distinct enough that they need to be able to edit.
Yeah.
And so I'll do the same here. I'll say, what's the weekly growth rate of actions? It's now finally asking me about questions I want to answer in the dashboard. So it knows what metrics are important. It knows what I'm trying to do. Um, and so I'll, excuse me, I'll go and select a few of these questions, and maybe I'll just look for the most common action types per department.
Yeah.
Maybe let's do a correlation here because those are always interesting. In between maybe average duration and actions, and let's look at that by department.
Interesting.
And so we've got a number of questions here. We'll see, maybe pick one or two more. Um,
As
yeah,
you're selecting these and you hit refresh, is that sort of helping the context of the new questions that come back in, if that makes
yeah,
sense? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We're
Yeah.
trying to learn from everything that's happening here,
Yeah.
and ultimately from the different roles in your organization as well. Like, what are they interested in, and what are they looking for?
Right.
Um, so we've given all that context now to Ridge, but if you notice, I've never had to say, well, I want a bar chart here, or this on this axis, or
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah, true. Yeah. You haven't had to define the canvas, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to point out, we're dealing with about 200, well, it was too fast. About 220 rows here and
Yeah.
about 20 fields. And
Yeah.
so what it's done is it's now given me what should be a best practice dashboard
Yeah.
using all the principles that we've learned
Hmm.
about how people interact with data, and it's interactive from the get-go and perform it from the get-go.
Yeah. Gosh, it's
Yeah.
so crispy, man. I wish, a certain tool had that today.
Well, it was always one of the big bugaboos when I was at Tableau. It
Yeah.
just it's hard for people to work with data when it's so slow.
How interesting. You just swap them there and then they swap
Yeah,
positions. It infers your kind of intent through just the actions. It makes a lot of
right,
sense. Yeah.
right. And you can do some other editing. What we're trying to do is get you to pretty much a 90% good dashboard,
Hmm.
um, without you having to do much of
Right.
anything. And then you can go and do a few more edits and change things around, etc.
It's very
But all the
flexible.
toil, like, even when I sit down to create something in Tableau, it might take me a half an hour to an hour, even though I'm pretty good at Tableau and I
Yeah.
know exactly where I wanna go. I just gotta
Yeah.
click all the buttons, and it takes a while. Um,
True. True. And I guess the other thing is, you have sort of uh, several challenges. This is a pretty important one because this is also going to be the end product when you embed it. So you kind of need to help the user build something that they feel comfortable sharing with the world. It's not as simple as a dashboard that you're going to use yourself or maybe just share within
yeah,
your team. Your target audience for something like this is much bigger. So the best practice, making it sort of work well, really meets the expectation of a much larger audience. So I think most analysts are used to. We're not used to shipping stuff that tends to have audiences that start in the thousands rather than end in the thousands, if that makes sense.
yeah, that makes sense, and it's a good point. It's where best practice comes in. I mean, if you're creating an ad hoc analysis for yourself, and you know exactly what you want to get to, that's fine. Or
Yeah.
or maybe you're creating it for someone else. But when you are putting it on the web, it needs to use all those principles about
Yeah.
how to the humans actually understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. I guess. And then so once you save this, like what
Yeah.
happens? Well, where does it go from here?
Well, I'll save it, and then I'll just show you. We can click over to the Explore tab here just to get a sense
Right.
for what the end user would see.
Yeah.
Um, and then we can go back into the app. So let me go back into Ridge here. And I can go find that recent ridge,
Hmm.
overlay bridges. Got quite a few in here, and I can just get the embed code, or
Right.
you could do a server embed. And the server embed would be if you wanted to partition it. Say if you wanted to have different customers see different views in the
Yeah.
same dashboard, but their own data, you might do a server embed using Jot. Otherwise, you just do a simple iframe embed, generate that embed link, and then
That's it. You're good to go. Yeah.
you're ready to go.
Yeah. So simple.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I think, is there any sort of thought around, I'm going to call it like MCP tooling and skills, if in a very sort of general sense. So, is it possible if someone has Ridge to be able to use like an agent to help build the Ridge? Because essentially, you already have the skeleton frameworks in order to be able to just replace that sort of chat interface with a Claude or whatever
Yeah.
people want to use, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love the way you're thinking about that. There's a few things. One, that when I was building,
Yeah.
all I was doing, all that Rich had was the context and the data.
Right.
And so we're making that available via an API and ultimately an MCP so that
Right.
if you do want to just say, hey, I'm going to give you a blob of context, or maybe at the end of a workflow, even an agentic workflow, you
Exactly. Yeah.
created some context, right? You
Yeah.
could just say, here's the data set I care about, here's the context,
Hmm.
and just go. And you could end up with a dashboard from that.
Yeah.
Um, we're also looking at using MCPs in here. So say you have DBT or you're sitting on top of Snowflake or Databricks. They
Yeah.
have integrations where you could say, hey, tell me about the provenance of this data. We really do believe in being a pluggable presentation layer for data for and being very interoperable. And that means that we don't want to do everything in here. We want to reach out to your other products if that's where you created the data and you
Yeah.
understand all the builds and joins and the provenance of that data, where it came from. You should be able to ask that question here. Uh,
Yeah.
and like, yeah, go ahead.
I get excited by this because I think one of the biggest limitations of BI tools is that because they've always needed to be driven, it's not been really that easy or scalable to have what I would say, like, it's going to sound not ideal, but procedurally generated sort of data stories. And so the context I
Yeah,
think of is sports, where you might have lots of different audiences that want to track different things, but then they don't share the same universe. And so this idea of
that's a good.
a sports user comes into like a website, maybe they're tracking the World Cup as an example, right? They can type their own story, but the data still comes from your universe, and then it goes, you can procedurally generate something of interest to the individual, and it's just a ridge. It's just the same data set, it's just different
Yeah,
questions, and it's super exciting.
yeah, yeah. We've had customers. One serves local government departments
Yeah,
with analytics, and each local government has different legal and
exactly.
regulatory things they need to show. So they all
Yeah,
have the same data, but for this little city or you need to create you need to give it some context and different
yeah.
context for another. And so yeah, I love the sports example though. I hadn't thought of that. It's a great
Yeah,
one.
yeah, exactly. Like every fan has a passion, right? And
Yeah.
I think football is a
Yeah.
good one because no two football fans can agree on which statistics matter. So yeah, giving people their chance to tell the story their own way is a very
Right.
good way to diffuse a lot of, let's say, fan to fan sort of what's the word, debate.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
amazing. It's really cool. I'm really excited by this because I think I don't know if it's just AI, but it feels like there's been a lot of pent up innovation in the space, and suddenly there is
Completely agree.
lots of avenues for this kind of technology to be explored, and it's really powerful.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's I don't know if it's surprising to me, but like why it's surprising to me, but it feels so obvious. Like you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
I guess the core of your product is actually the repeatability and the let's say the AI. I'm going to call it the AI interface. Shoot me down if I'm wrong, but yeah, the sort of interface that you're giving the user with the data through AI to get to that outcome, but also to engage with that data in ways that I don't think have been broadly accessible today. If you embed a Tableau Public Viz as an example, right? You have to educate the user on how to use that specific viz, but that doesn't carry over to anything else. Whereas you're just using language, you're just using that prompt window, and that's something that people innately have. It doesn't stop them asking silly questions, but it does generally make sure that even if it answers a question, yeah, the answer is going to be pretty well presented, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I know you've watched people learn Tableau and other tools over time,
Yeah,
as have I,
yeah,
and,
yeah,
I just, after doing it so many times, hundreds if not thousands, I realized people have to understand the data,
yeah,
they have to understand their domain, they have to
mhm,
understand a front-end tool, which
yeah,
is something like a Tableau, and they need to understand data viz best practice, which is something not many people understand, which is
yeah,
why sometimes, you get something that's a bit unwieldy in whatever tool it's been built
yeah,
in.
yeah,
And when you think about that, having the expectation that to communicate with data, you need to have all of those skill sets is
yeah,
really a high expectation. And
yeah.
so
It is.
trying to take it down to, hey, you know what questions you want to ask. You know your business. You know your domain,
Mhm.
and we can bring a lot of the rest of that into the experience.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of, you talked about semantics, and you highlighted the product's focus is to sit on top of your data stack. What are some of the biggest challenges there? Because I know that the industry has, you know, decided finally to align on this thing they're calling OSI, which is, hey, let's all actually make sure that when you run a query in your stack and my stack, they add up to the same thing.
Yeah.
Because we acknowledge it hasn't always done that. Um, that I'm a huge skeptic of that approach. I wrote a newsletter about it because I think it's actually quite a challenging thing to do. From your perspective, you're building a product that hopes to sit on top of that. What are some of the biggest challenges there that you sort of see on the horizon in terms of how things like that might sort of affect your product, but also where you might have to, get your hands out and fix problems because those initiatives can't fix them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I have yet to see someone who has perfect data and a perfect
Yes,
stack,
exactly.
right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think if you have perfect data, it means you're out of business and probably have been for quite a while. But I think all of those things are helpful. Our one of our founding principles is to be interoperable and to work with
Yeah.
people's data stack. And so,
Mhm.
you can have a really well-refined semantic layer and work with Ridge, and we'll sit on
Mhm.
top of it, or you can have none and just have data in a Postgres, and your semantic layer is table headers, right? And we'll work with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, you can have really sophisticated ETL, and
Mhm.
you can do a lot of validation in your stack, or you can do none, and we'll help you work through that as well. So
Mhm.
really, nobody can make their data perfect, and we certainly
Yeah.
can't make people's data perfect. But what we can do is acknowledge the reality of the situation, that there are different stacks at different levels using different kinds of technology,
Yeah.
and just try to make the promise that what you've tried to centralize in your stack and what you have ready to show to customers will respect that and will
Yeah.
leverage it.
Yeah, amazing. When we last spoke, we talked about sort of so many customers that I think would have loved a tool like this, would still love a tool like this, and non-for-profits are obviously a big one that come to mind. I can't think of how many organizations, even just for-profit companies, journalism. So many of those sectors need a tool like this, and um, I think one of the things I've thought about since then is how do you how do you see this tool going from what I would call a customer to the analyst? Because I think that's one of the biggest, let's say, challenges that I think I realized today a lot of BI companies have had, which is that they sell to a very different persona than the person who uses it, right?
Yeah,
And the best product fit for like the product is not the buyer. Never, it rarely is the buyer. But with your product, where those two really do need to be so close together, how do you close that gap? Because I see it as a big challenge today. I realize Salesforce have failed on that front in so many different
mm,
realms. Yeah, how do you solve for that problem, given you're building a company, I guess from scratch?
it's a great question. I'd love to hear your take on it. But
Put me on
one
the
of the
spot.
things I
I'll
think
come
was
to it.
yeah, one of the things I think Tableau struggled with in Embedded, and
Yeah,
so did some of the more legacy solutions, was the delivery model.
yeah,
And you had to do this massive, massive implementation, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And
yeah.
obviously, then you're getting everybody involved, your CFO, you're doing this long thing. I think there's something lost when you have to start there. So
Hmm.
what we're doing is we're actually making it possible to have a trial and then have a
Yeah.
free plan forever.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then if you want to go and embed something and make it possible to an external use case, then
Yeah,
we start to charge you. And we do it use case
yeah.
by use case.
I see.
And the reason why we do that is because a lot of companies already have embedded analytics or external analytics or what have you,
Yeah.
and they don't want to rip it all out.
Yeah.
But they have somebody, and it's often somebody in the product team if it's a product company, who has just built out some amazing functionality or is
Hmm.
delivering value, and they want to show the value. They want to communicate that to the customers, and
Yeah.
so they have this need. They can't get engineering resources. There's no way they're going to go convince their organization to buy Looker or Tableau or
Exactly.
something at 500,000, and so part of how we're thinking about that is really thinking through that person who is
Mhm.
sitting there frustrated that they can't get their story out.
Yeah,
And if you were that person, what would you want? You'd want
yeah,
something that you could get going fast with, that you could play with before you have to buy, that you could
Mhm.
if you could buy it, we have price points mostly under $10,000 a year, and so
Yeah.
you can get something up on your website without going and getting a massive budget or,
Yeah.
doing a big process rigmarole. So I
Mhm.
don't that's how we're thinking about it. I'd love to hear what you think about
Yeah,
this.
it's a great one. I think one of my biggest frustrations is that I've come to realize that, I'm sat here teaching the world products, I guess, and I've always had access to every part of the product. So it's always been very easy for me to rationalize this is the best way to use something. But I've done a couple of talks before and I've realized, I did one talk at Salesforce Tower in London. I asked, hey, everyone, like, put your hands up if you've got, this license. And
Mhm.
like, no one put their hands up. And then I was like, okay, put your hands up if you buy this product. Everyone put their hand up. So I was like, so you all have the license. You just don't know it. And so
Yeah,
on one hand, you've got this huge disconnect. I guess discoverability is one of those
yeah,
challenges, right? And then on the other hand, you've got people who, when they look at that price, they kind of um procurement is trying to protect the wallet. They don't like the number doesn't care, the feature doesn't care. They just want to say, what's the lowest number available on this price sheet? And can we do we really need anything above that? And that can rip out the innovation out of a product very quickly, right? And make it very normal. So the best example of a solution I've had, like, talked to a few people, is like, I use Tableau in this context. Is look, Tableau should have always had a license that was basically gave you every part of the product up to a point. So basically, you have to play with the boundaries very well. But if I take data management, which is massively underutilized, they should give you a certain amount of credits that are always free.
yeah,
Yeah. And what you do is you create a problem for the admin where they have to decide who gets those free credits. The product can always do it. Everyone can do it. But if you want to increase that utilization, then you basically already have a good problem, basically, right?
mhm,
At the moment, you have no experience of it. So you have no value to demonstrate to anyone. And you have to take such a big risk because your license is tied in for the whole year. So you have to go to someone and say, hey, can we just increase our budget by 20%? For this feature that I think might be useful. It's like
yeah,
no one's gonna have that conversation. You never try it in a trial because you're so busy trying to set up the whole environment right in the
right,
first place. Like, governance is like the big issue. So I've always said, like, every product should have just basically let you try every part of the product free up until a point. This is typically called freemium, but
yeah,
I think it should be a bit more aggressive in that companies are also different scales, different sizes, right? And success looks different at different sizes. So if you're, let's say, in a big 20,000 person enterprise, that boundary needs to be a little bit more permissive because you'll hit that limit very quickly. Whereas if you're in a small, like, 50 to 80 person organization, that boundary can be a lot lower because, again, success looks very different. And it just feels like in all the pricing strategies that I've seen in the industry, like, it does that's the bit that's never been
yeah,
innovated on. Like, which is just, can we figure out sort of, dare I be the one to suggest this dynamic pricing
yeah,
that actually helps the license be discovered? I can't believe I just suggested that as a solution, but you know what I mean. I mean it
yeah.
in a positive sense rather than this negative sense where we're trying to find out, like, what's the maximum you're prepared to pay. Instead, flip it. Let's try and find the maximum value that a client can have. But anyway, that's
Yeah, I
my
know, I love that. I
sense.
mean, I
Yeah,
think there's also we just discussed this, in so many ways over the years, but, I think there's also the fundamental question that I have is does everyone wanna be an analyst?
yeah,
Now, I go
exactly.
back to
Yeah,
I think anybody who's really trying to do their job well, they wanna be informed, they want to use
yeah,
data, but that doesn't necessarily mean going into a tool like a
yeah,
Tableau. You know,
yeah,
they may not need the license, and that's why we keep coming back to this embedded scenario, right? It's like
yeah,
the person who wants to share it pays the fee,
yeah,
after the freemium, after the free trial, and then it's free. Now, it may be authenticated via JOT or something if it's in
yeah.
your product because you need to make sure the data is secure. But
Mhm.
once to your end customers, to them, it's just seamless. It's just part of the
Yeah,
data product. It's completely white labeled. It's
yeah,
completely seamless. There's no extra
yeah,
auth. And I
yeah,
think you can do that internally as well, because getting into another product is a hurdle, right? It's
yeah,
a hurdle for everyone.
yeah,
I think as an industry, being more creative about pricing, I agree with you on that, will
yeah,
help us kind of broaden the conversation.
Yeah.
And I think recognizing that data just has to sit alongside work.
Hmm.
And there will be people who help the data sit alongside work, and maybe we call them analysts and data engineers and others.
Yeah.
And then there will be people who do the work, but those people
Yeah.
don't have to be analysts.
Hmm. Yeah. It's true. It's true. You raise a good point as well, which is the surface of work. I like your product because it's maybe if I say this, you can challenge me on this. I think it's one of the easiest ones to place exactly where it fits into the flow of work, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Back in the day, you would have heard of this phrase of being in the flow of analysis, right,
Yeah.
inside a Tableau, right? And more recently, I've been having debates about with AI coming around, like where are people going to be doing the work? Are they going to be doing it inside of your Claudes and Chat GPTs, which will have MCPs and hooks to reach into your infrastructure, or actually will it be more in things like Microsoft Teams and Slack, and then
Mhm.
those are actually controlling the agents and going out there? The jury's out on this. The thing
Yeah.
I like about your product is it just lives on the web, and the web is everywhere. So really, it can be anywhere you want it to be, as long as it has the internet and it has some ability to run some sort of browser technology that's modern. It's going to be good. And actually, even I don't want to speak on your behalf here, but phones today have as much sort of browsing compute as even like a typical laptop. So actually, this can be a really universal product as well, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, the web is a universal communication mechanism,
Yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So yeah,
So
it's
I
good. It's
actually
good.
won't challenge you on that because I think, it's I mean, obviously, we need to do the work to get the
Yeah, to get
content
there.
to people, but I think,
Yeah,
Tableau tried and did so much work in terms of taking us from the world where everyone had to kind of code
true. Yeah,
to a more drag and drop world. Um, but again, there's just those fundamental assumptions. Some people are
yeah,
not going to go. Some people won't write documents, and that's okay. They
true.
may want to read them, but they don't want to write them, and others will edit them. And so I think we just need to have a more robust sense of what's happening. I do know that humans are always going to need to work with data because
Yeah,
we get people who will say things like, "Well, in the age of AI, all the data analysis will be done kind of in a black box, and you'll just get the
yeah,
answer. The answer is 4.5."
yeah,
Like, well, I don't believe that because if you're working in any kind of a complex environment where you need to understand what you're doing, you need some kind of sense making about what's
yeah,
happening that got you that 4.5. Maybe you don't have to do all the computation, but you need a way to process the data. And we know that that is visualizing data. We know that
yeah,
we work well with visualizing data.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. So, yeah, I guess if people want to try Ridge AI, how do they do it? Like, what's the wait list look like? Yeah, this
The
is your
waitlist.
platform to tell them how to get involved.
Yeah, thanks. The waitlist is a couple hundred people now. We're working through it. Every week we're opening up more licenses.
It's pretty exciting.
Um, yep, and you can just go to ridgedata.ai to get on the waitlist.
I'll put it on screen so you can go and have a look. And one of the interesting thing I noticed that you launched roughly the same day as Golden and Francois.
Yeah.
And the thing I really loved about that is actually this community of, let's say, people launching products who've all come,
Mhm.
let's say, from the same heritage. I think that's super special in a really fun way because it shows that you know you can have many different ideas out of the same great foundation, which I think is a really strong message as well, positive message to send to people that although we have tribes, you can build new ones, and that's how innovation works, which is super fantastic.
Yeah. Tim, I have a
Yeah.
question for you.
Go for it.
How have you seen, I mean, you're working with all the kinds of companies and enterprises. How have you seen
Yeah,
AI adoption, AI value? Like what's
yeah,
going on with data and
it's a
AI
great
inside big
question.
enterprises?
Um, This is a hard one to answer because I use one of my favorite terms at the moment, which is leading and lagging indicators, right?
Mm,
So there's the indicators that I would say are leading indicators are when you have teams who've traditionally taken really good care of their warehouse, um, are already at the point of maturity where they can have, I guess, really advanced questions and discussions around what the next sort of phase of their innovation looks like. And I say phase because
Mhm.
it is a very strategic move. You can't just like click a finger like the big startups and suddenly be, you know, running compute in AWS, standing up your AI agents. It's for a lot of, you know, normal enterprises who don't have venture capital to the hilt, like you have to take a lot more measured approach. What they're starting to do is they're starting to have what I would call like a really high level of semantic hygiene, which is okay. For a
Okay.
long time, we've had this discussion about semantic analytics. Like
Mhm.
now it really matters. Like, okay, for anyone who's on the fence, let's just put that to bed now. Let's get behind this program. Let's stand up these projects. Those take time, and you know,
Yeah.
the people who are doing that are far and few between. Their salaries have gone up, so it's also pretty hard to find those people. So that's sort of phase one, leading indicator. Semantic hygiene, standing up these projects. Lagging indicators, you're starting to get people in the line of work sort of going off and doing their own thing. And I mean this in a positive way. I don't mean this like, you know, someone rogue on another laptop with ChatGPT and Claude taking screenshots to do their work. What I mean by this is people are starting to find new ways of doing their work in anticipation of this innovation arriving. So
Mhm.
I say this because that still sort of signals a gap, which is you've got the infra work sort of starting to happen. You've got your Databricks and Snowflake standing up capabilities to put agents on top of your warehouse, which I think will enable a lot more people to do it, especially those who don't have the resources to build these big infrastructures. You've got the people um, broadly, I'll say broadly because not everyone's really sort of bought into this, but broadly speaking, people are starting to try and find, okay, what does actually work today and how
Mhm.
can we get that stood up for the future? Where there's a gap is how do we close that gap, right? So that is still a thing I just do not know
Yeah. Yeah.
because that is a missing piece, right? You can build a castle, but doesn't mean anyone will walk into it.
Yeah.
Likewise, you can enable the whole entire organization, doesn't mean the tool's going to work.
Yeah.
And so I say this to say that, like, I still cannot, for the life of me, see yet how, you know, your everyday enterprise closes that gap. Your big startups, your big, venture-backed things, they just throw money at the problem, right?
Yeah.
They'll set up AWS Turk, which is that, you know, service where you can hire like human beings in another part of the world to literally do the work that you think a
Yeah.
machine should do, and they'll just blow through it. They'll treat it as a brute force problem. An everyday enterprise can't do that, and not least, you know, it's not profitable. It's not a good idea. So I'm still waiting for that answer. I wish I'd seen more examples. There are definitely companies who have done this as well. I'm just not exposed to them. But I think if I talk about the masses, that's the gap I see at the moment. I am excited though. I think in 2 years' time we'll have this discussion, and these problems will largely be solved.
Mhm.
Um, the models will largely be much more capable than they are. I don't
Yeah.
know if maybe that's part of the solution. The capability of the model closes that gap for people, and then what was the software problems just goes away. Um, but uh, I think the biggest risks are companies who've not had good semantic hygiene just
Yeah.
get left behind woefully because you can't rush that work. If you just not had the heritage or the um, discipline to
Mhm.
organize that work, you just get left behind. I worry that a
Right.
lot of companies are going to get found out.
Yeah. I've seen some solutions that help gather that context with AI.
Yeah.
I think it can be accelerated. Um, but I agree. And I think one of the hardest things about semantics is that people don't know they want it. It's one of those
Yes.
things where it's so valuable if you have it, and it accelerates so many things,
Yeah.
but nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want some semantics because I love
Yeah.
sem." They want it for 100 other reasons, and
Yeah.
to your point, by the time they figure out that they need it for those 100 other reasons, they've
Yeah.
gotta go back and start over. And
Exactly.
and I think the other risk with AI is actually that the proliferation of tools that we're seeing now sucks semantics into more places. I mean, that was something that
Yeah.
happened the last wave of BI too, is that
True.
you had all this capability, but then your semantics are just spread everywhere, and that's almost as bad as not having any semantics at all.
True.
And so I think there's, modern data professionals have to be very thoughtful about their stack and
Yeah.
what layer of the stack,
Yeah.
because otherwise they're going to get caught with a huge problem.
Yeah, yeah. I've had a few people at Salesforce sort of push back and talk about, why is it bad that the data gravity is in like in our platform and not elsewhere? And I think it goes back to this exact point you're making. Like when you look at that problem you've just highlighted, it does make sense for the data gravity to be, as close to your warehouse as possible, because, you know, if you're going to go to, 12 other places, you want them all to have the same foundation. You don't want to have to multiply out the effort. The other thing is, um, if I look at sort of, I'm going to call a Salesforce like a CRM as like an sort of end user capability. There is data that sits outside of that ecosystem that is also valuable to the enterprise, right? So you might want to say connect your CRM to, I don't know, your EPOS system if you're working in retail, right? So your transactions versus your Salesforce CRM records, whatever. Those two need to be brought together. There's only one good place to do that, and that's not going to be in in either place. It's going to
Right,
be
right.
somewhere
Yeah,
central. And you actually earlier said something super important again that's relevant here, which is no organization has perfect data, right?
yeah,
And so the job of semantics is never done. That's another thing I forgot to highlight, which is I think people think this is like a one-time strategic endeavor, and they don't realize what they've
yeah,
started is a journey they can never stop.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's gonna be a rude awakening. I think, people who've put investments thinking, oh yeah, this is just like to get ourselves on the AI train, and then your analysts will come if everything works, if everything goes to plan. What you should see is an explosion in the need for your
yeah,
semantic capability, right? Because
yeah.
people asking new questions, understanding better ways of working.
And your
Yeah.
business should be evolving. I mean, data is just a
Yes.
representation of what's happening in the real
Of your
world.
business, exactly. Yeah.
It's just a representation. So if your data stops, you have no more new data or no new semantics. It
Yeah.
means something's not, you're not reflecting what's happening in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. I don't wanna sort of overextend the time. I really appreciate you joining the channel, and I love what Ridge AI is building. I'm gonna obviously have a go at the product. We'll make some videos over the next month or so, trying out the product. Maybe I'll try and build something for the real world. One of the things I'm trying to do is put together like a little, like, I'll call it just him stack or whatever. So
Oh,
you
cool.
know,
I'd love to see
tools
you
that
doing it.
tools that aren't your everyday tool that we can get to do very very interesting things. So look out for that in the near course. But again, Ellie, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll have you back maybe in 3 6 months. Who knows? You tell me
Sounds
when it's
great.
appropriate, and yeah, we'll see where Ridge AI has gone.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Tim.
No worries, pleasure.